This is Rugby Unity. I am David Pembroke, and Ewen McKenzie. Eddie Jones has arrived back in Tokyo, and he will join us in about half an hour's time, which is very good of him. But before then, I am going to spare the world my views on what happened on last weekend, particularly between Ireland and South Africa. If you do want my views, jump across to TikTok, because I have expressed a view and there are plenty of people who are offering a view, not only on TikTok, but Facebook and Instagram and everywhere else. Certainly a topic of conversation, but we feared that there was going to be a match that ended up radically imbalanced, and certainly in that match, that's what happened.
No question about that. I mean, I think I find it difficult to concentrate on the game because I sort of think the contest's over. Like, I see a card and I sort of get disappointed, but there we just saw card after card after card, and you know, Ireland were admirable and sort of hanging in there, but it sort of just ruined the potential of the game. I mean, when I looked at the game, we were talking about the lineups the other day. It had, I was thinking this is going to be a pretty good contest, but the sting goes out of it. I mean, we're into card territory after 20 minutes, and I guess we can always argue the merits of the cards and what else we do, and we've started that conversation last time round. But I just think that these contests deserve better, and you just have this, 15 on 12, 15 on 13. It just kept going. And to Ireland's credit, that South Africa didn't get away from them, but they were severely hobbled in the process. So never really got a chance to fight it out. And we really want to know who the best teams are. That's the whole point of when you're playing test matches. You want to find out. Not the adversity shouldn't be coming from yellow cards. It should be coming from the opposition. So I think that we're going around in circles. I feel like every week we're having these conversations, but we're not the Lone Rangers. Everyone else is saying the same thing. It's got to be tough to be a player. It's got to be even tougher to be a coach at the moment. And when your livelihood's on the line, it's hard, and these results matter. They matter, we know, because we've been following the journey of Australia, trying to get that sixth position on the rankings, because it's all tied into the World Cup and things. So these wins and losses matter in terms of where you finish, what pool you finish up in, those sort of things. So it's hard to sort of dismiss the relevance of it all. But unusual game. That's about all I can say. A willing contest.
But I suppose the argument is, and I totally agree, that under the current system, the referee wasn't left with any choice, really, because of the pressure that South Africa were applying to the Irish players. And the players responded as they felt they needed to, either that the cynical move of Crowley to play the ball on the ground. Prendergast was probably unlucky that he was at the end of a warning sequence where, okay, sorry, mate, you're going to have to go. But I suppose the point is, isn't it, about alternative sanctions? Now, you were a player, a very good player, an elite player, a World Cup winning player. What would stop you from behaving in that way?
In my day, these sort of things were regulated by the other players. Like you collapse the scrum, you got a boot in the head. That's what happens. So I tell you what, no scrums got collapsed. If you lay around in the bottom of a ruck, fiddling with the ball, someone would stomp on your hand. Like, that's what had happened. So now I know that's unpalatable for the current generations and whatever else, but that's what happened. The players regulated the game. It was a bit brutal, I've got to say. I got plenty of scars all over me, and I wasn't always first to the breakdown, so at the bottom. But guys like Poitevin and the McCord, they got dealt with, and we know that from the there's famous games against France, New Zealand, France at Nantes, and where Buck Shelford was, he got his scrotum ripped open. Like there's things happen, So, but as much as that was brutal, it actually regulated a lot of the things that now dog the game, which is that the blatant cynical stuff and whatever. So now we've got to find alternate ways to sort of regulate it. and we can't regulate it in real time without ruining the spectacle. So we've got to come up with some system like other sports do, where you get sanctions. You get taken off the field and someone else goes on the field, so there's no loss of numbers on the field, but you've suddenly got a yellow card against your name. You get 3 of those, you automatically miss a game at the equivalent level. You don't get to wipe it out at club level. Yeah, you miss it at the equivalent level. So that's how it's got to work. There's got to be some cumulative impact for people that keep flouting. And I always watch, there's situations in the game where you'll see the deliberate infringement. They've already given away one, so then they'll just do it again and again, especially when they're defending their goal line. They'll just do it again and again. And if the opposition scores, quite often the referee doesn't go back and deal with those infringements. Now, one of the games, I think it was the England game, he actually went back and still put the guy in the bin. So that's good. But, I don't know. The only way you can deal with this is off the field without ruining the game. The game is a precise game that's got lots of elements in it, and therefore it doesn't function so well like a league game where you've just stretched across the field and you haven't got people tied up in the ruck contesting possession. That's the sacrifice. The contest for possession goes out. As soon as you're a man down, the contest for possession drops off, and then you just have this sort of running at brick walls, and that lines up the defence for more penalties in the end. So it sort of like becomes a self-defeating sort of approach. So I think we've got to really think about that and try and come up with something different, try and deal with the matters off the field and have a cumulative penalty so you don't penalise the team, but you as an individual, you don't get to play.
In cricket, if you don't reach the maximum or the allocated over rate, there is a financial penalty. What if instead of getting a yellow card and off the field, you lost your match fee?
Well,
it was like €10,000.
That's okay.
That'd keep your hands off. Keep your hands off the ball.
If you're playing for a team that can afford match fees, yes, I agree. That's a possible approach, but some teams aren't financial enough to have that, and I don't. Tying it back to that, the romantics would think that we're trying to play for the love of the game. That's what it always used to be. The money side of it, that can be a penalty, but I think you get penalised anyway. If you don't play, you can't play. You don't get them. You don't get any fees. You're not playing. You're not allowed to be. You don't get anything for not playing, so you don't get a cap. So I think that's got to be that's where the focus has to be, is to start denying players time on the field. Outside of ruining the contest on the field on the day. So deal with it after. If you're a repeat offender, then you pay the price. You don't play.
All right, let's leave it there, because I think everyone's probably getting a bit tired of it. I'm certainly getting tired of it. And we can move on and hope that World Rugby will do something about it. They haven't said anything this week. So anyway, we'll wait and see. So Ewen McKenzie, let's just perhaps look at those two teams who did play the game. And if you come to the end of the 2025 season, although South Africa does have a game this weekend against Wales, you would have to say that throughout the year they have been particularly impressive in the way they have not only won test matches, but the demonstration of the quality of players, their flexibility, their adaptability. They have been the team of the year without question.
Yeah, I don't think you can argue otherwise. Look, even in the game, even in the Ellis Park result, they had played 20 minutes of the fastest rugby you've ever seen, and they accrued points as a result. And then, they fell in a hole after that. So, there was a bit of whatever happened, there was a bit of X factor from the other side and whatever, and they stayed in the contest. But aside from that, they were in every game at some point. They were imposing themselves on. They just have this ability to impose themselves. And the thing for me this year is that now with Sasha at 10, they've just got it's a bit more zing in terms of the attack options. A bit of X factor there as a threat. So you've got the forwards that can punish you in different ways, but and the bench that can punish you as well. And then they've just got that X factor now in the back line that I think's improved them from previous years. So they're in a good position going forward. I was probably sceptical around that Ellis Park game, whatever, I was starting to think, well, maybe they've reached the top of the mountain, but no, they seem to they found some of the younger players and a bit more X factor in some of those individuals too, and they're game winners in their own right. So and we see that every week now. So they're a pretty good package.
And Ireland, it's the beginning of their season, so it's probably a bit hard to draw a line through it at the moment. But where do you see they are on their journey to 2027 Rugby World Cup?
Yeah, they're the same. They've probably got a little Prendergast. They've got a couple of X factor players, so there's a bit of churn. Not as much as South Africa, but there's some churn there. So they're still relying on a core group of players that know how to play. I asked that question a few weeks back about where they are on the mountain too. But I was, I thought their efforts in the circumstances on the weekend were pretty commendable. To be able to sort of hang in there, and they didn't concede tries with all those men off the field. They didn't concede a lot of tries. They would have conceded energy. And, they made a contest of it regardless. And, a bit of luck, they could have been a little bit closer at the end. But they were very willing, and they haven't gone away. So, they'll, as you say, it's the start of the season for them. So it makes for an interesting Six Nations for them.
Eddie Jones has joined us from Tokyo. Welcome, Eddie Jones, to the program.
How are you, Link? Kimby?
Good, mate. Congratulations on the win.
Wow, it's good to get a win, mate. I can tell you.
Yeah, I'm sure it always is. Yeah.
So I was only able to watch the highlights, and we will put a link in the show notes to the highlights because the commentator in Georgia was one of the most excitable, and he enjoyed the game. It looked like there was a decent crowd there. So what was the atmosphere like in Tbilisi at the weekend, Eddie Jones?
Yeah, no, it's a really good rugby country, Georgia. They've only been playing rugby for 60 years, but they've got it's a national sport there, and they've got a beautiful little stadium sort of cut into the ground. They had I think there's about 15,000 there, maybe a little bit less. But yeah, and they're European style soccer crowd, so they whistle and yell and are quite loud, and it's quite an intimidating stadium. Last time we played there, they were using laser into the lights of the goal kickers, but they refrained from doing it this time, luckily enough. It was a good contest, and they're a big physical team. I sat next to Lucette Prop on the way back from Tbilisi, who plays for Claremont. 15 of their 23, I think, plays in the top 14, so they're a really tough team to beat, so it's a good win for us.
25 points to 23. Which parts of the game were you most pleased with in the way that your team played?
Well, I think, when you play against Georgia, mate, you're only going to come through the front door. So we had to stop them at the front door, which was in terms of the scrum and the maul, and I think we did both of those pretty well. And then we always expected we'd have to play off transitional play. We got one try out of that, and then when we did get structured ball, we put them under enough pressure for them to concede penalties, and they were able to convert that into just enough points. And as you know, in rugby, you've only got to score one more point than the opposition.
And the reaction of the team, obviously having been close against Australia, close against Wales, and performed creditably over the late October, November period. How did the team respond to ultimately achieving the victory?
I said to the boys afterwards, you go in the dressing room after Wales and, everything's bad. No one's happy as expected. The officials walk in and they've all got a grim look on their face. And one penalty goal difference, and that's all it is. Everyone's happy, everyone's jumping up and down, the songs are a bit louder, the beer's a bit colder, the pies are a bit hotter, everything's better, the officials walk in, they got a smile on their face. But as a coach, you one goal away one week and you one goal away in a positive way the next week, and you just got to take what you can get, mate.
It's the old thing, isn't it? Don't get too sad when you lose, don't get too happy when you win.
just to reinforce the point Ewan made, I think last week, referees are deciding a lot of games now, and I don't think that's a healthy state for the game. There's just too much depending on the referees, and as we spoke about last week, the referees don't set the protocol for the TMO, so that's a World Rugby issue. But I also think that the referees are being hounded into a corner to get certain things right in the game, and as a result, they're making decisions that aren't in the context of the game, that are only there to tick boxes. We've spoken about sealing off. We get one penalty a game for sealing off, and we can see many, many more examples of that in the game. So we need to get back to, right, what are we going to get absolutely right in the game, and really hammer that so our game's going to be in a better state. Because the games on the weekend were fantastic, although I watched that Holland South Africa game and I found it hard to watch. Because of all the intervention. Everything's going to a TMO. There's people coming, there's people going. It's really hard to get any sort of flow in the game, and it became tedious to watch.
No, we've just been having a discussion about that, and I was a bit the same. I got to the second half and started reading the newspaper and just kept one eye on it because the contest was well and truly over. But what's the solution, though? Like, I know you've raised a whole series of things over the last few months about how the game can be improved, Eddie Jones, and we're here now, talking about it on a regular basis. But what are the 2 or 3 things that could be done that would improve the situation? Because I think we accept that it's not the referees, because the referees are doing what they're being asked to do. But what is it that can be done to improve the refereeing and the governance of the games?
Well, first of all, there needs to be an awareness that things aren't right, and that doesn't appear to be there at the moment. There appears to be this almost like protectionist type attitude. We've got to look after each other. We've got to support each other, but we've got to get the game right. The game is crying out. The game when it's played well is such a great game, but at the moment it's going down the wrong track, and we've got to firstly acknowledge that it's going down the wrong track, and then what are the 1 or 2 things we can fix? Not a lot of things. What are the 1 or 2 things we can fix that will improve the game? We've spoken about the function of the TMO. The second thing is, I think, in terms of the way the referees are being marked, there needs to be a change in that. Instead of trying to get everything right, just try to get a few things really right and accept that there are going to be things wrong in the game. And we all have to accept that. And I think if we had the ability to have a conference or whatever it is to thrash all of that out, then I think we'd get pretty close to the mark.
Yeah, well, I tend to agree with you that if there was the opportunity for open dialogue, for discussion, bring the right people into the room and have the conversation, but then communicate to the fans about what in fact is going on. Because as Ewen McKenzie said last week, we are mushrooms at the moment, and we don't get told, we don't understand, and so we don't know what the instructions are, and therefore can't judge whether it's right or wrong. Ewen McKenzie, what are your thoughts on what Eddie Jones has just said?
No, look, I agree. I think, and I think the communication piece it's not underrated. I think it's necessary. I was reading someone's comments online earlier today, and they were talking about the Wallabies and talking about messaging, and they were talking about communication of selections and changes, which is one thing. But then they moved on to the refereeing side of things and talked about the lack of communication as a fan. The lack of communication about what actually goes on or what's going on, or if something's, and there's been a bunch of controversial incidences in recent times, and the lack of communication about the actual incident, but also if there's any follow-up or any change. There never seems to be any change. It just seems to drift along. And so if they're tapping things in the background, it'd be good for people to know that the World Rugby cares about it. I'm sure they do, but it does, because you don't hear anything, you just assume that it's just a vacuum and there's nothing going on. So I think that's the problem. We've got to tidy up a couple of areas of the game. Eddie made a point about, sealing off. Since the Borthwick videotape, Australia's getting penalised 2 or 3 times a game for, cleaning out from the side. But they're legitimate penalties. It's just a question of whether that's across the board or whether they're just targeting Australia now. So we need to work out if that's how relevant that is in the suite of things that they can penalise. So I think they have to go back and recalibrate and work out what's important. But for me, the most important thing at the moment is 15 on 15, seeing the players duking it out, not seeing a manufactured result by. And we can look at these games. We'll go through the game. We'll talk about New Zealand, Wales. They had a cracking game in the first half, a couple of yellow cards in the second half, and that changed the whole complexion of the game. It was like a level pegging at half time. And then suddenly there's 2 yellow cards, and then New Zealand scores a bunch of tries, and that's it. So there is the game. So, as I said, I just look at the timelines now. I always look at the timelines first to see what happens. But pleasingly, in Eddie's game, there's only 1 card. I mean, that's unbelievable. Only 1 card in Japan, none. So, that was a discipline from that point of view, and that might be all credit to the referee, actually. I didn't see enough of the game. But we've got to get that bit sorted out because it needs to be players determining the results. That's what it's got to be.
I don't think the request for more communication and explanation from the fans is unreasonable, particularly when you consider that the game continues to be challenged financially around the world. The only way that we are going to attract more people in more countries to be further engaged with the sport is that if we get the game right. And I think we do have to consider much more the needs of the fans.
The 3 of us are on a podcast talking about rugby, at elite level, and yet all 3 of us had exactly the same reaction to the Ireland-South Africa game. I lost interest, Eddie lost interest, you were reading the paper. That's the problem. You got a major spectacle, a major event, a major game. To be fair, the media talked it up. You had all the head-to-heads were fantastic, and then we had no game. And so it's very hard to be interested and to even talk about it now because I've sort of pushed it out of my mind because it was a non-game in my head. Other games were more interesting, and that's disappointing. So if we think that, what does everyone else think?
Yeah. Well, I think it's the same. Eddie Jones.
Well, it just struck me. I was watching the Australia-France game. So, and I'm not absolutely sure of the scores in the timeline, but it's approximate. 19-all, kick to touch for France. They get a penalty, probably a right penalty. Kick to touch, maul, penalty again from the maul, next maul, sin bin, and then that basically decides the game. In that period, then France score enough points to win the game, and up until then, it's an absolutely ding dong, good contest of rugby, good display from both teams. But then you get that one bit of play where someone's put in the bin, and sometimes I'm sure it's necessary, but there's got to be a better way to keep the game even. And what I mean by even is that it's a fair contest between 15 versus 15. Because our game's set up to be 15 versus 15. And we see that pattern so much now. Around that 55, 60-minute mark, penalty, go to touch, more collapses, warning, next bloke goes to the bin, and then there's a sin bin and there's a try. There's got to be a better way to do it. There's got to be a better way to do it.
Well, we actually, as it is now, with the scrum, for instance, if a front rower gets yellow carded, then they have to bring another front rower on to maintain the scrum contest numbers, right? So then you lose a back rower. So it's unfair on the back rower. He gets sent off. He has to go and sit on the sideline while another front rower comes on the field and plays in the position. So we maintain the scrum contest. So if we're maintaining the scrum contest, why can't we maintain the game contest? Why can't the yellow card player go off and someone else comes on? And then maybe you have a limit on how many, if you're using the players off the bench to cover a yellow card scenario, maybe you can choose to play short. But if you use that player, then they're used. You can't keep replacing and having interchanges and whatever else. That there's a finite number of times the players can come off the bench because you've got HIAs covering already. So it does get a bit confusing seeing players coming and going off the field. But there has to be a better way to get there. And we're holding it. We're maintaining numbers in scrums for scrum contests, but we're not doing it for the game contest.
That's a really valid point.
Yes, a good point. Anyway, I think we might leave it there and see if we can get back to the rugby. Just actually, Eddie, before we leave the Japan-Georgia game and just the Japan season, you're now sitting in Tokyo looking back on the year, and clearly at the beginning of the year you would have had some expectations and hopes and other things. What sort of score would you give the team out of 10, and in terms of parts of the game that you've developed and some of the areas where perhaps you may feel like you've not quite come as far as you would have liked?
Well, if I look back to the first year, we couldn't compete against top 10 countries in the world. We were struggling to compete. And I think now we can. And I think now we put ourselves in a position in 2 of the 4 games to win the games. Could have, should have, you don't want to say that, but we're in positions to win the game, right? So that, to me, that's a massive step forward. And we've done that by being more consistent in our set piece. One thing, as I said, against Georgia, our scrum and maul defence was outstanding. And we probably even edged them in the scrum, which is a pretty big notch in the belt. So we've improved our set piece consistency. Our defence has improved. Generally, our line speed's more consistent. Our spacing's more consistent. Our movement around the ruck's more consistent. We're still not as good as we should be at finishing off scoring opportunities. And that's an area we need to keep working on. And I think generally I see it in the world now, the support play in rugby is not as good as it should be. Because I think everyone's getting really flat on the ball and putting a lot of pressure on the offloading player. And you see that a lot, that pass, hit the shoulder of the support player, go through his hands. And I reckon that's one area we generally need to improve. And I think in rugby generally that could improve a lot, the support play. Because we've gone from this over-organised period of attack now to this, now we're seeing it morph into this much more unstructured attack because of the amount of aerial contests and the opportunities to attack off that. So that's an area we're working on pretty hard.
Ewen McKenzie, your thoughts on that?
I agree, and I was going to jump in and say the only thing I think Japan has to work on is the finishing, and some of that's from what I'd call over enthusiasm. I said it along the way. The halfback is like he's too fast, at times, and so I think there's an energy there which it's hard to coach that and it's hard to create it. So they've got it. It's just a matter of tempering it in the right situations so you don't get those errors, and that's the difference, I think. So it's a better problem to fix than saying your scrum and the line out of shit house. Like that's so it's you're a long way down the line when you've got competitive set piece and you've got possession and you can play organised plays and actually manage tactics on the field because you know you're going to get the ball. So it's a good problem to have a couple of years out from the World Cup.
We're not talking rugby, we're building it. Rugby Unity.
All right, well, let's just take a look at a couple of other teams that are attracting attention. Obviously, New Zealand 52-26 winners over Wales, but the All Black fans are certainly not happy with the season, not happy with the way that the team has played. Ewen McKenzie, your thoughts on New Zealand at the end of the 2025 season for them?
Well, I think I read that they lost 4 games, and that's they're very hard markers. I binge watched a series, and maybe I'm late to the party. It's called the All Blacks in Their Own Words, and it's a series that's on pay TV, and I was interesting to watch it. It's about 8 episodes. It's about the 22 and 23 season going into the World Cup and obviously losing the final. But I recommend it because I've coached at that level and whatever, but just to see where their focus is. A lot of talk about not the haka, but just how the team functions culturally. And it's obviously they're in a transition from the older eras, but it's a really interesting look into how they function as a team. And so this Foster was the coach, and so how they dealt with the adversity, because they were losing games off and on in that period too. So I recommend that as a side thing. But I think that's where they're at the moment. If you stand back and look back a few years, they had a lot of really good world-class players who own positions, the Whitelocks and these sort of guys who are 100 gamers and whatever that own positions in the World 15. And now they're not as fortunate. They've got certainly some potential guys coming through, but they're not in that same position when you've got the likes of South Africa and whatever. So they don't have as many World 15 walk-up starts as they used to have, and take out Mo'unga and some of these guys, and then the injury issues they've had. So it's a messy situation for them. So, any other team would probably be happy with 4 losses, but they're hard markers there. So, and they've got a tough culture to live up to, and that's what showed up in that series I was watching. I only watched it the last couple of nights. So I can see why they're under the pump, I can see, because they're really hard markers from the ex-players to whatever. So I think they'll still be thereabouts, I just think their issues are more about the way they're playing the game a little bit, and they've probably got a few hard selection decisions to make. But they're starting to unearth a few good players, and they'll be better in 2 years' time. So, it's all is not lost, but they're losing the game to England. They just expect to win every game on their end-of-season tour, whereas Australia didn't win any apart from the Japan game. So there's different spaces for every team. So I don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but they're just a bit inconsistent at the moment. But they've been there before in that 22 season, and then 23 they were inconsistent, but they still made the World Cup final and could have won it. And if you remember, I'd forgotten, but they had the send off, the red card at the start of that game, and talk about ruin the biggest game of the year. So here we are, a couple of years later, still talking about the same problem, where the big games are getting ruined by people getting sent off. And I watched it, and it wasn't much in it, to be honest. I mean, we've probably got more in that game, but it turned into a red card off the field. Off the field, they converted it to a red card. So here we are 2 years later talking about the same types of problems.
Eddie Jones, your thoughts on New Zealand at the end of the 2025 season?
Yeah, I think there's a trend, one of which we've spoken about before against South Africa, where, up till 2019, they were winning 60% of the tests against South Africa. And since then, they're down to 40% against South Africa winning success. So that'd be a worry for them. I think I agree 100% with they're in a selection sort of grey zone at the moment, where they've lost a lot of senior players. They've got young guys coming through who aren't quite there, but they know they're going to be good players, and they've got to persevere with them a little bit. And they tend to make errors in crucial parts of the game. If we use another example, Tane Edmed, who came on from Australia, Australia 19 all at halftime, they're attacking, they're going well. The time's up on the clock, and he kicks a 50-22. So it's just those little actions that take the pressure away from the opposition that is also a problem with New Zealand. And I think if they can get through the next 12 months without too many losses, and they can build the confidence in the team, because within that they need to build a new leadership team. And I think that's one of the things they may be struggling the most with. Again, that ability to handle big males. It doesn't seem to be there at the moment.
They talk about this in the video, because you've got those senior players are all 100 gamers that were retiring. They actually talk about there being a change in culture, that the young guys coming in, they're different. And Eddie's talked about this before. They're the guys with the iPhones and they want to dance in the dressing room and stuff like that. And you can tell that wasn't the era before. That wasn't the era that they still got the cultural things of sweeping the dressing room and things like that. But there's definitely a change in the type of person coming into the All Blacks. And so they are. I do feel like my impression was that there's a transition there in terms of the culture, not in terms of wearing the black jersey, but just in terms of the type of people coming into the team. And Eddie's talked about this before. And so it's how you deal with that situation where you've just got people that just value things differently. And, I'd say, oh, they're distracted by their phone, but that's just what they do. So you got to really get past that, And I think there's a bit of not a problem. I think they're facing what other teams have possibly already faced, but they've got just a transition with these young guys coming in. They're just different types of people, there's different values in life, and they're trying to marry that into the traditional All Black mould where it's, and I sense that that's probably part of the problem for them to conquer,
So that's sort of an intangible problem, but it translates to the pressure moments on the field. I think coaching-wise, within the assistant coaches, there seems to be a bit of chopping and changing. Out of interest, I listened to one of those breakdown rugby shows they have in New Zealand, and they were talking about the fact this panel, which are all ex-All Blacks, they weren't quite sure who was the defence coach and who was the attack coach and who has the most authority. So I think there's a bit of that to it as well, which probably wouldn't help. Because one of the things that's happened, particularly since you've stopped coaching, that the number of assistant coaches has blossomed, has increased, a fair bit, because of the workload involved now. Not because people want more coaches, but there's a workload that needs to be looked after. But then you get the problem of communication and messaging, because very few coaches talk and speak the same language, and if you get a group that does, it's a real competitive advantage for you. And maybe they're going through a little bit of that at the moment as well, so that wouldn't help things with this changing sort of inner room culture, maybe a little bit of here and there in the coaching staff, and it's just a little bit unstable. But I think as Ewan said, in the next 12 months they can fix that pretty easily.
Yeah.
What do you mean by workload, Eddie Jones? What's changed in the last few years that requires more assistant coaches?
Well, I think players want more one-on-one time now. Definitely, they definitely want and need more one-on-one time now. And to have a one-on-one with the players, not just sitting down and having a one-on-one. You've got to do the preparation for that meeting. Make sure you've got all the necessary data. And particularly the younger players now like a lot of data. They really do like data and they like evidence, whereas 20 years ago you could sit down with a Wendell Sale and say, mate, tell me what you did well, tell me what you didn't do well, and he'd remember it, But the players these days, they like to see the evidence much more, which is how our society is now, isn't it? There's a lot more ready information about. So there's that part of it. I think the training times become less, and therefore the amount of preparation you have to do for the training time is even more intense, and your usage of the time needs to be more specific. But I think, like anything, there's a limiting number of coaches you should have or you need to have, and maybe some of the teams have gone over too much and there's too many voices, and that becomes a real job for the head coach, because then the head coach is just managing messaging all the time.
There's more information available too, Pemby. There's more, I assume there's a lot more information available, so you've got to synthesise and work out what's relevant. And so working out what's the winning game and what's going to influence the game, you've got to sift through all that, because the computer age, they can produce videos of angles and things like that, or anything, I guess, and statistics and whatever. You've got to work out if it means anything, if it's useful or not. And you spread that across 5 or 6 coaches, and I could imagine it could get confusing, So it makes it hard for the head coach. You've got to pull that together at the right moment. So,
Is that the case, Eddie Jones, that there's just so much data to get through?
Well, there's always been a lot of data, but there's probably more now. And the other thing is that the players read nearly everything on rugby websites. They're huge. They've got a huge appetite for reading about themselves and about the game. So they've got a lot of information, but a lot of that information isn't in its full state. So it can be quite skewed information. So one of the things you've got to make sure is the information you're giving the players deals with some of the misinformation that can be on the internet. You know, they'll take things out of context, so you always got to be checking for that. And the players have a shorter attention span now, so your meeting presentations need to be a lot sharper than they used to.
Very good. Oh, well, that's a good insight. So listen, we will jump to the third voice. And Wynand Verster on Facebook says, I love Eddie. Perfect match for a team like Japan. Osu. Thoins Grenwald on YouTube says, great discussion and pleasantly really impressed with Ewen McKenzie's expert take on the laws and red cards. Appreciate your honesty and objectivity. I have subscribed. And Richard J. Carsten says, Eddie Jones will always be one of my favourite voices in rugby. We as South Africans still appreciate his input during the 2007 campaign. So, questions to you, and I'll start with you, Ewen McKenzie. At MRVN has asked to both you and Eddie, as Tier 1 coaches, could you dramatically improve a national team like Zimbabwe with strategy and tactics, considering the amount of talent that comes from Zimbabwe? Ewen McKenzie.
I'd say yes. If you're focused in that area, I don't know what the playing depth and resources are, but I'm sure that that you could do a lot in that area. How competitive you could make them in a short space of time, I don't know. But you could make a difference if you can get that bit right. Yeah, I'm sure. You got to work out what your strengths and weaknesses are, but you don't fix things over. You can't win a World Cup overnight, but you can be more competitive if you can do certain things. It just depends on. It's a really hard question to answer because you don't know what the resources are. I don't know who the 10 is. I don't know who the 9 is. So you got to work out what tactics are left. It could be a bit simple, but you'd like to think that there's enough options there to be able to do something.
So really the question, Eddie Jones, there is around the impact of quality coaching, getting the strategy and tactics right. What are the first couple of things that you would do if you were appointed the coach of Zimbabwe?
Well, if I go back to my Japan experience, I got the first time I coached Japan, I got all the coaches who had been involved in the previous campaigns together and asked them why Japan couldn't win. And it basically came down to, one, we're not big enough. One, we're not tough enough. One, we're not team enough. So then I tried to sort out those problems, right? So if we're not big enough, what can we be? We're not tough enough, what can we be? If we don't play as a team, how can we make a team? So I tried to address those. There'll be some systemic problems in the system that you need to fix. And it'll be about how they think about rugby and how they approach their rugby. So if you can fix that and then find a way for them to be successful, I think every team can play above themselves. Because what you're asking the team to do is play above themselves. And you can find a way to play above yourselves if you get the players to believe in it, if you get the players super fit, and you've got a simple enough but complex enough strategy, which is a contradiction, I know, for the players to be able to play it successfully. So you can get them to play above yourself. Now, if Zimbabwe's 25 in the world, they get to 16 in the world, that's a huge achievement. And that's what you've got to be looking at. Everyone's not playing to the gold medal, unfortunately, but you got to play to a level where you can play above yourself and therefore progress up the ranks.
Very good. All right, the next question is from @Anthony Ellum. He says, in regards to the game trying to crack down on head contact, it's obviously to avoid future litigation. So maybe instead of continually getting the opinions from ex-players and coaches, perhaps we should get the viewpoint of a lawyer or lawyers who are experienced in this field. Ewen McKenzie, what do you think about involving lawyers in the assessment of head contact?
It sounds expensive, I'll tell you, for a start. But I'm sure we don't. I think we need many more people involved in the decision making. Look, Eddie made the point last week. There's so many situations in the game. There's where there's head contact. I mean, we talk about head contact. I mean, what does that mean? Are we talking about direct blows? Are we talking about watching a boxing match? No, we're not. So we're talking about, performing the functions that happen in the game, cleaning out, whatever. So there's going to be glancing and brushing because you have to put your head in the way. That's what happens. That's what the good players do. So we saw a situation, I think it was the South African 12, he was carrying the ball and he wiped out the Irish bloke. He made the tackle. So it was the inverse of what... Moody, that's right.
And Tommy O'Brien got...
Yeah, and he got smashed. And I'm thinking... And he just went back to the wing. And I thought, well, hang on, is he going to go to get an HIA? He had blood coming out of his nose and whatever. So there was head contact, but it didn't matter in that situation because it was the attacking player. So it was poor defence. And so nothing happened in that situation, yet on the inverse, there would have been a yellow card. Like if it had been the roles have been reversed. So nothing. So that's I'm sort of going, well, does that matter? I mean, it's head contact. The guy could sue. He could do whatever. But no one cared about that. And eventually they took him off to have his head assessed. But that situation in the game is not arbitrated at all. So it's only the other way that gets concern. So I'm sort of saying, what other instances in the game where there's inadvertent head contact or whatever? And then we're just going to say, well, there's some risk in playing the game. There just is. So I think getting lawyers in at this point, I think that's a bit of a silly approach. I don't think we need that at all. I mean, the lawyers get involved anyway when there's a hearing, a red card hearing or something. Everyone gets a lawyer anyway, so they get their chance. And but no, I wouldn't be doing anything different other than trying to come up with a better way.
Okay. At A Clayton 1759 on TikTok has asked, we need to see consistent wins from England first before we make any World Cup calls. A team like Argentina has shown the best consistency other than South Africa. Which teams do Eddie and Ewan think have been the most consistent this season? Eddie Jones, I'll start with you. Who has been, in your opinion, the most consistent team in 2025?
Oh, without a doubt, South Africa. Yeah, South Africa have been absolutely outstanding all year. I don't know how many games they lost, maybe one against Australia, but they've just been at it the whole game. Went away from the game plan for a little period of time, went back to it, reinforced it, and been playing it brilliantly. And the physicality and the intensity that they play with is just what everyone else is trying to match. Apart from those guys, England's had a good run the later part of the year and are certainly developing nicely. I think, that was an interesting game against Argentina. There wasn't as much in the game as you would have thought. Argentina missed a couple of clear opportunities to score, hit the post with a penalty goal, and, even in the end, they had a chance to win the game. But a good, those two sides are the two sides that are most likely to break into the top four. England's already in the top three now, but to really challenge that top four.
Yep. Ewen McKenzie, obviously, I think everyone can agree that South Africa out and out.
I think South Africa and England's obviously they've got wins, but there's a few teams that aren't losing many games, so it depends on the criteria. But I like Italy. I think Italy has improved. If you're looking for an improved side, they've been consistent. I think Italy's been much better. I think Wales are starting to improve, but the All Blacks lost 4 games, but they still won a lot. And Ireland, I thought might have been getting towards the end, but they seem to have had a bit of a resurrection. We'll see how that goes in the Six Nations. So there's certainly some teams putting their hands up, but you've got to be ready in 2 years' time, so that's the key. So there's still plenty of time for others to become more consistent. And you see that in the cycles of other World Cups where teams just build to the right point. England have done that before. New Zealand are good at doing it. South Africa are good at doing it. So, there's a job for Australia there to become a bit more consistent in the next 2 years.
I reckon next year's Six Nations will give us a pretty good view of where the Northern Hemisphere sides are. This November, sides have been, some of them have had lines coming back without much preparation, without much gameplay. So maybe, a few of those teams, particularly Ireland, more so than anyone, have been underprepared for these November series. But I think they'll be 100% all flat out for the Six Nations. That's the tournament that counts. That's the tournament where they benchmark themselves. So I think that'll give us the clearest picture of where those Northern Hemisphere teams are.
And with that, Eddie Jones, and it's a long way out before the Six Nations. You don't know who's going to be injured or other things, but what would you expect, and how would you see the game developing in the Six Nations next year? What are some of the things people should be, getting ready to look for in the contest in the 2026 Six Nations tournament?
Well, I reckon there'll be two tables, mate. There'll be 1, 2, and 3 Ireland, England, France. There'll be 4, 5, and 6 Wales, Italy, and Scotland. I think there's quite a big gap between the top three. I think Italy, as Ewan said, really improved and be competitive. But that 1, 2, and 3 clash is going to be, it's going to be again about the brutality around the game line, the contestable kicking, and once you get into 22, who can use their power with a bit of deception to score tries.
What about you, Ewen McKenzie? What are you looking forward to in the 2026 Six Nations tournament?
Well, I haven't pulled up the draw, so the order of the games will be interesting to see who plays what when. But there'll definitely be two. It'll be a two-tiered thing. I agree with Eddie there. But this is with the Nations Cup next year. We haven't had that before, so normally the Six Nations, and it drops off, but everyone's building to that Nations Cup period, so there's a bit more to follow from that. So it's going to be an interesting year how that all pans out, and what how teams can hold their form. The European teams can hold their form post their domestic seasons as well. So there's a lot going on at the moment. So the form lines will be interesting. But we've got time. Yeah. We've got time.
And Eddie Jones, as an international coach, a current international coach, and the introduction of the Nations Cup, does that change your thinking for next year? And how do you think other international coaches will now be thinking about the 2026 year, given that there will be a playoff around about this time, late November, in London next year for the Nations Cup?
Yeah, I don't think it'll change things too much, mate. Everyone will want to prepare their teams as best they can for the next game. All it's done is put a bit of structure around it, which I think's good. And the culmination at the end of November and having finals again, I think's a good step for rugby. So I think, it really won't change how coaches prepare themselves for the games. I think it's just, get your team right for the next test. We play 3 in July, one of which we have to play away. So we've got to, in the middle of our 3 games, we've got to travel to Australia to play Ireland. We've got to work out how we cope with that because the 3 games are obviously important. And then we've got the 3 games away at the end of the season. So, you've got to work out how you can deal with that travel, particularly, I reckon. For us, it's going to be a big thing of how we can keep the players fresh.
I just pulled up the Six Nations draw. So the very first game is France versus Ireland in France. So that's there, and then you've got obviously Thursday you go through it all. Then you've got in the middle you've got England versus Ireland, and the last game of the tournament is France playing England. So the first game, in the middle game, the last game. So that'll make for. Yeah, the first game's going to set the tone. There'll be probably a team with a loss straight up, and then they're going to have to fight their way through the tournament, and then it might change all in the last round again. That makes for a good tournament.
Yeah, look forward to that. Just a couple of bits of news. The 2025 World Rugby Award winners, Malcolm Marx from South Africa. Gentlemen, your thoughts on him as the men's 15s player of the year? Has been outstanding all year. Eddie Jones?
Well, he plays up here for Kubota. They make tractors, and he's like a human tractor. He's like a human tractor. Like the power he exudes in the scrum and at the back of a maul, and then his general play, his presence around the ruckers and Jack Lou's enormous. He's turned himself into a fantastic player really richly deserved award for him.
Yeah, I've really rated him, and I've been disappointed the last couple of years that they've been playing him off the bench, and there's probably reasons why that is. So this is the first year he's sort of been able to start consistently, and so he goes on and wins the award. So, to have him sitting on the bench for the last couple of seasons quite a bit, playing off the bench, maybe that's preservation, but good. That's great to see him. I was going for the Ox, but anyway, the other front row is good, so that's fine.
And Ewen McKenzie, Fabian Holland is the breakthrough player of the year. Your views about his winning?
No, I think he's been he's a player that the All Blacks have needed. They needed a good line-out guy. He's a go-to guy. When they've started him, they use him a lot in the line-out, and he's been becoming a better player, and he's played quite a bit of football. I thought they might go for one of the more glamorous options, but I'm glad they've gone for the industrious and he's a very consistent player, and I think that's what they need. And replacing, the Whitelock types players, you need someone like that's going to come through and play. Going to play 10 years in the team, and he's got the potential to do that.
Eddie Jones, your thoughts on Fabian Holland as the breakthrough player of the year?
I think if you look at all the successful sides at the moment, teams that are doing consistently well, they've all got a big man in the middle that dominates that ruck area. If you talk about the ruck, think about the ruck and then think 3 or 4 defenders out wide. Someone in there that stops when you end under the opposition ball carrier, and when he carries, he gets them going forward. And New Zealand had that in Metallic and in Whitelock, and losing those two guys, Barrett's an industrious player, but he lacks the actual physical presence, whereas Holland's got that. And he certainly looks like he's going to develop into a good player, so a good award for it.
Yeah, indeed. Congratulations to Fabian Holland, and a great backstory coming as he did as a young man from Holland across to New Zealand and made his way through the Otago system and all the way through to the World Rugby Men's 15 Breakthrough Player of the Year. So congratulations to him. Some of the other results from the weekend: Uruguay 31, defeated Romania 21. Portugal 33, defeated Canada 27. Spain went down to Fiji, 41 points to 33. And Albania defeated Greece, 57 points to 0. Hong Kong, China were too good for Belgium, 15 points to 7. And as we mentioned before, Italy defeated Chile by 34 points to 19. And interestingly, Santiago Pedreiro of Chile was the try of the year, scored against Samoa in the South American Pacific playoff in the Rugby World Cup qualifier in 2027. Did either of you catch the match between Chile and Italy? Because I thought I did watch it, and I thought Chile gave a very good account of themselves. Ewen McKenzie, did you get to see that one?
I did watch the highlights, and I just wrote down Italy 15, Chile 7 at half time. So they were in the game. They were quite, and Italy got away from them just at the end, really. So it was sort of typical of the whole weekend, where the contests were pretty good at half time, and then things changed in the second half. So it is an 80-minute game, and they just didn't quite hang in there long enough. But they were quite good. And it's the first time I've watched them. So I'm sure we'll see more of them.
Scotland 56, Tonga 0. England defeated Argentina by 27 points to 23. And in the Rugby Americas North Sevens tournament at Larry Gomes Stadium in Arima in Trinidad, Canada won the men's Tier 1, Mexico won the women's Tier 1, and in the men's Tier 2, the Dominican Republic. And in Rugby Europe Trophy, Czechia defeated Poland 32 points to 30. Now, we are going to come back again on Friday to have some conversations where we will talk about England, we will talk about Australia, we will talk about France, Italy, Wales and other teams, and how we look back on the 2025 season as to where teams are as we start to sort of wander through and sort of gently make our way into Christmas after what has been an extremely hectic time for rugby. Eddie Jones, you must be feeling a bit tired since we've been running the program. You've been to North America, you've been home, you've been to Europe. It's been a lot to manage your team through a very, very busy period of time.
Yeah, I'm going to be more tired. I'm going to take my wife shopping now, mate. So I think the rugby's been pretty easy.
All right. Well, all the best in that wonderful city of Tokyo, and Ewen McKenzie. Good luck to you as well. We will speak later in the week. Ladies and gentlemen, please engage with us on social media. We've had some fantastic results. Last week on TikTok, we had a couple of our TikToks go to over almost 300,000, two of them, and one of them earlier this week went to about 80,000. So there's lots of engagement around Rugby Unity, and very grateful for the increasing number of subscribers engaging on social media. So if you do leave a comment, a question, we would love to hear from you, the third voice, because your voice is an important part of a Rugby Unity. So please check us out wherever you would like to engage with us. We will be back later in the week with another conversation from the wonderful world of rugby. But till then, people, please be kind to each other. My name is David Pembroke, and it's bye for now.